Justin Holcomb, PhD, is a minister and professor of theology and apologetics. Now, he has authored, co-authored, or edited more than 15 books on numerous topics, including sexual assault, domestic abuse, biblical studies, and historical theology, a wide range. But he and his wife, Lindsay, actually co-authored one of our most recommended family resources, former Wednesday Bookmark, God Made All of Me, Helping Children Protect Their Bodies. And now they're back with a new book, God Made Me in His Image, which helps children appreciate their bodies. So welcome back, Justin.
Well, thank you very much. It's always good to be back. And thank you for shining a light on an issue that parents would want to know about and should care about.
Absolutely. Okay, well, we're going to talk a lot about some stats and some facts that are kind of harsh realities, but important to know. And in just a minute, I do want to mention just quickly that the book is about these children on a school trip. They go to the zoo. They learn about certain animals that have unique physical characteristics. So I want to ask, what lessons does this teach the kids on the trip and ultimately the reader?
Yeah, we want to talk about body image, and so we thought it'd be easier to talk about some animals that are over there, not about themselves. So the children are processing either in thought bubbles or in communication things that, like one boy, Mateo, talks about what his brother called him. His brother called him big ears, and so he's thinking about his ears. His brother, one girl, is thinking about her frizzy hair and freckles. Another one is thinking about a birthmark, and so the children are kind of talking about. And we kind of left it at things like that, just children thinking about their bodies and themselves. We didn't want to get into every single possible issue. And then while in the middle of thinking about themselves, they're hearing really cool information about they're on a safari zoo park. It's not a safari. We didn't stick we don't think most kids get to go on safaris to Africa. We don't get to usually. So this kind of safari zoo park thing where they're hearing neat information about different parts about these animals. So like the elephant with the big ears, well, there's actually cool information about, so we actually had to study about animals. The ears are used they actually can hear. It actually is for hearing, absorbing sound waves, but also for shade and other things. And the giraffe with its spots, and the leopard and the rhino who's missing a leg. And so there's going through different parts about the animals. And the big idea is, hey, the distinctive thing about each animal is actually really cool, interesting, or helpful. The thing that makes the giraffe distinct is actually what makes it so unique and special. It's not a negative, quirky thing. It's actually like, oh, that's actually really important. So the story we're telling without saying it is, how do you interpret that? Is the long neck because the giraffe's weird looking, or because God made it in a cool way and it can see predators and can get food that other people can't? Are the big ears because it's a goofy looking Dumbo elephant, or because they're actually useful and helpful and really important? And so the whole thing is, how do you interpret this thing? And then we want, hopefully in the hearts of the children and the parents there, who's interpreting you? How about, what if God interprets you? What if you're his image and not an accident? What if you reflect God and God really likes people? And so we're trying to get the conversation going and we're trying to step into a conversation that's already going about self-image, body image, and put some goodness in there that will help the children think about themselves.
Yeah, and you're using a lot of scripture to do that, which is great, and just helping kids understand that there's a purpose to the way God created them. But I love what you said. You're just actually going off of a conversation that's already happening. We know that for teens and even adults, social media can be really dangerous when it comes to body shaming, giving ourselves a negative body image. But, the statistics for kids, especially girls under the age of 10, that complain or stress about their weight, for example, is staggering. So I want to touch on some of that, and maybe you can actually, maybe in answering that, share what some of the most common insecurities that kids have are.
Yeah. Well, let me give you some of the stats real quick, if that's okay. So at age 10, around 1/3 of girls and 1/4, so 33% of girls and 25% of boys, say how their bodies look is their number one concern. At 10, 1/3 and 1/4 say it's the number one concern. 80% of all 10-year-old girls have dieted at least once. My daughters are 11 and 12. The idea of them even thinking about dieting is mind-boggling to me. Half of North American children between 6 and 8 are worried about how much they weigh, and half of 9 to 10-year-old girls are already dieting. By age 6, girls especially start to express concerns about their appearances. What was really got my attention was 5-year-olds whose mothers report currently or recently dieting are twice as likely to have ideas about dieting and food minimization than girls whose parents aren't even dieting. So what we're seeing is this is a huge problem, not just for teens. It gets worse for teens and adults, but it's starting at an earlier age. Some of the most significant areas where children are feeling insecure are height. So too tall or too short, both ways is problematic. Whatever's not normal in height is people feel insecure about. Their size, weight is one, which is, and then anything distinctive, skin color, light, too dark. I mean, that phrase is, this is across the board, across different groups of people. And those are the doozies. And then there's on top of that, depending on what might be distinctive for each child. As you can, if you're looking at a video of this, you know that my children probably have huge eyebrows. So for those who don't have video, they're distinct, they're strong. My girls have the gift of wonderful eyebrows that most women actually compliment them and say, "You are so lucky to have eyebrows like that. You can do anything you want." But what happens is those become they're stronger than most eyebrows. So there's comments about that. And boys, what is really important for parents and caregivers to understand is that boys are feeling this pressure also about their weight, but also about their physique. There's more boys taking more protein things and lifting weights at an earlier age than they should. That's actually harming their body. And so this is basically our image-centric culture and our hypersexualized culture is shaping and influencing children at an earlier and earlier age.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, there's so much we could talk about, and I think we're going to have to go a little beyond the bookmark for this. But I do want to ask, one of the things I liked about the book we featured in 2015, That God Made All of Me, is that you really put the onus on parents to have these important conversations at home with their kids rather than letting outside sources kind of dictate where the conversation, the narrative goes. But I think actually not just does the same go for this topic, but it actually goes beyond that. Like the issue can begin within the home. So can you just, as we wrap up, speak to parents for a minute, maybe caution them about the role that they're playing, but also give them some hope on what they can do to help this?
The hope is parents are the most influential influence in their children's lives, particularly on this issue. They are looking at how you interpret your body and how you talk about bodies and self-image, and they are learning from you. So set a positive example by not criticizing other people's bodies. As soon as you start talking about that other person, you're teaching them how to criticize other people, which is then teaching them how to criticize themselves. If you have your own insecurities about your appearance, do not make offhand comments and be critical about yourself, about your perceived flaws around your children. I have been shocked at how many, mostly women, but sometimes it's the dads, I live in Florida, going to the pool over the summer and watching a parent grab a part of their body and be like, "Oh, hey, is that a new bathing suit?" "Yeah, it's keeping this junk in," and they'll grab a chunk of their side right in front of my children. I mean, I'm sad for their children, but I've looked at them like, stop doing that. What are you doing? Deal with your insecurities in a more healthy way. But the children are actually watching. Try to keep them. Children are going to compare themselves to their peers. And so instead of doing the comparison game, be like, "Hey, you know what? He's really good at that, and that's great. You know what you're really good at is this." And so try to minimize the comparing amongst peers and celebrating strengths without having to highlight weaknesses. And another thing is just to make a list, reassure those children. This is what's really powerful, reassuring them of what they are good at. I just ask my girls, I'm like, hey, this is what I think about. You're really good at this, this, and this. What are you proud of? And then another thing for healthy body image is use different words than beautiful. Find a different adjective. I am disheartened at how many moms and dads, but particularly the dads who talk about my beautiful daughter and my stud, handsome son. I'm like, really? Is all we're coming up with is beautiful and handsome? Like, what about smart and kind and a good leader and compassionate and curious and adventurous and brave? Like, find more adjectives, because they hear these things. At an early age, I picked 4. Beautiful, sweet, smart, and strong. I've changed those, but I thought that those are the 4 realms I want my daughters to hear me saying about them. What do I celebrate about them? And parents are bestowing an identity to the children by the adjectives and the things we celebrate, the things we notice, and the things that we highlight. And the culture that might freak us out doesn't have the strongest voice or the most persistent voice, because they're with us. We can actually point things out. We can help defend against the cultural expectations. And so the hope for parents is it does feel daunting, but your voice is a lot stronger and a lot more powerful than most of us think.
So good. Well, I mean, the book uses scripture. It uses, like you mentioned, some really relatable body image insecurities with these kids to help readers understand and know that God made it all good. And it includes some fun facts about animals, too. It's God made me in his image. Justin Holcomb, thank you again, Justin, for all your time.
Oh, thank you so much. My pleasure.
So, Justin, is it okay with you if we go beyond the bookmark and just keep talking about this topic a little bit?
Yeah.
Because I just love being able to just, highlight more about what the kind of the repercussions, I guess, are in terms of allowing our kids to have these negative body images and body image distortion, as you call it. What are some ways that body image distortion is actually harming young people? And maybe think about the future, too, like not just now, but as they grow.
Well, one is food restriction. So nutrition and development, which is brain and body and bones. So if one is about size and weight, so disordered relationship with food is the catch-all. That has implications for biological, developmental, brain development also. A disordered relationship, so body dysmorphia, which what you think is normal, and how you view other bodies as normal, has implications not only for oneself and one's health, but think of someone who has a body image issue and they have children. That's why you have parents who are continuing that wrestling, and they're handing it off to their kids because they haven't dealt with their own issues and their own insecurities or their own harm that's been done to them. They end up just kind of offloading that to the kids who that's not their burden to deal with your issue with food or control or body image or whatever. Our job is to protect them from that. The other one is it also has an influence on our future relationships and their future relationships. If I keep on saying to my daughters and people say to their sons, hey, you're beautiful and handsome, you're beautiful and handsome, you're beautiful and handsome, that limits what they think they're capable of. It limits what they think their worth is, and it influences how they relate to other people. I've seen boys and girls who they've heard beautiful and handsome their entire life, and they're picking up from their culture, and that's basically what they present. And you give them any other compliment than their appearance, and they're not really sure what to do with it because they don't even value it. So we're making a priority chart for the children in our lives by what we celebrate and what we value, and they're picking up on that. It also is going to influence, in addition to, we're talking about the children's future, right? It's going to influence how they view sexuality in themselves. Let's say you have, people who when you live in a hyper-sexualized culture that values shape and availability and the parts of bodies that are highlighted in media and in our culture. If we don't have something about that, then we're gonna end up having children who are very insecure about their bodies, who turn into adults who are very insecure, and that type of thing is what influences how we make decisions with regard to sex. Either I don't feel secure, I need more people to want to do things with me and act out on this to fill a void, or people are getting married and there's less freedom because of their own insecurities that are there, and so I think it has a rippling effect in children's lives.
Well, and if I can even add one, I think even just in terms of our career choices, because I know, like, I grew up, as you can see, a redhead, and I honestly didn't like and appreciate and embrace my hair color till probably after high school, and it was no fault of my parents. I mean, they were constantly trying to, compliment me and build it up and tell me how beautiful and unique. But I think that's part of the issue, right? Kids don't want to be different. So, like, just the fact that we're walking down the street and someone's going to say, "Oh, wow, red hair, beautiful hair," or whatever. So for the first, half of my life, it was a negative thing. But then as I got out of high school, and I don't know how psychologically the shift happens, but all of a sudden now there's a confidence, and maybe it's just getting out of high school, but there's a confidence that grows. And I mean, now I've spent my adult life, on social media, in theater, on the stage. I'm proud of the image that I now embrace as how God created me. But we talked earlier about how the parents have a role to play, and I don't think my parents ever pointed it out as being a bad thing, but then I don't know if there's like a real answer to how do we prevent that from happening. I mean, again, my point was it did influence not influence, but it allowed me to have the confidence to be in a career or a ministry that I'm in, but it definitely didn't start that way.
Yeah. I think it's a really helpful insight. I don't have anything to add to that except I wish I would have thought about something like that. That makes a lot of sense.
But like, it must just be high school. It must just be, being pointed out as being different. And it's hard when you're younger. And then hopefully kids will grow up seeing the other side of it when they kind of get out of those influences, I guess.
I hope so. Yeah. And I think that's part of just psychological development also. Children are in developmental flux until like 18, 21. There's a certain age. I mean, just even your brain is still developing, your emotions. So I think, people talk about like kind of coming into their own type of thing. And some people never have that feeling. They don't. So I do think there's something about just normal child, youth, teen development that you do kind of move beyond that eventually, hopefully.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, it doesn't mean you do, but yeah. One other question that I wanted to ask, following up to the last that we talked about just parents, again, cautioning them on how they talk to themselves and how their kids are watching. What would you say, though, to parents who are maybe actually concerned about their children's health? Like maybe they are overweight. Is there a way to, safely encourage health without it sounding like, I think this is probably something that a lot of parents do struggle with. I don't know. Is there something you can answer to that?
Yeah, the way you talk about food, giving it categories, that's a really good question. We started talking about sometime food and anytime food. That way it's not good food, bad food. What we don't need is a category of bad food, because then suddenly that category can just get lumped in with other stuff. So good food, bad food is out the door. Sometimes food and anytime food. Sometimes food, desserts. So just find a different word for it. And then we talk about food all the time because my girls were dancing and now they're doing volleyball. They used to swim. And so we talk about food is at least two things. One is there's a lot of talk in the Bible about food. God, so it's community. It's communing. It's relationship. It's a symbol of that. So God, he sets a table for Adam and Eve in his garden. Like, eat anything you want, just not this. And then God's hospitality, and a lot of times God's eating with his people. He's feeding his people. He's providing for his people. You have Jesus with the Last Supper. You have the wedding feast of the Lamb. So the whole God's divine hospitality is a really cool theme. Like, that's why, my mom's Italian. So like they joke about it. They're like, oh yeah, like God's like grandma. I'm like, yeah, kind of like this We like to celebrate. Food is a part of goodness and blessing. It's also fuel for our bodies. We need it. And so let's pick wise, like there's certain food does certain things. And what we don't need is, explain what carbs do. Explain carbs are great. Like we talk about carbo loading. I'm like, I'm going to go, we're doing the Savage Race and I'm going to eat a bunch of pasta the night before. And why protein and why water and why not sugar? And, explaining just instead of sugar makes you fat, carbs make you fat, like find a different way of communicating about how food is fuel. So it's a big deal because it's celebratory. It's also just fuel, and it's okay for it to be fuel, and your bodies need it. And so you have a high view and a pragmatic view. And then the way we talk about bodies is, and we talk about how strong they actually are and what they can do. That's why instead of focusing on like, hey, you're not actually healthy, it's like, okay, well, start doing more healthy things with them. And start talking about the strength of their bodies and tell a story about how you realize, hey, I walk, why do you walk? Why do you go to the gym? Why do you do what you do? What's your hobby that you do? And talk about it not as, oh, I like doing this because this is how I lose weight. Find some other reason besides, make it anything but weight loss.
Yeah. Oh, man. I mean, again, it's all coming back to just how important it is to start in the home and to have these conversations. And if parents feel like they're not seeing, what they want to see in their kids and their kids' attitude and their kids' physicality, then what I'm hearing you say, Justin, is that they need to educate themselves and make sure that they're setting an example. Okay, I want to wrap up because I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I want to tie it all back to the book a little bit. There's just one quote in the book that I really liked. It's a little bit of a small nugget. It's not necessarily a big overall takeaway, but it was that lesson about the mirror. Do you remember that one? Can you kind of just explain that briefly?
Let me get it.
Well, I can tell you. I mean, I can summarize it for you.
Go for it.
That was the one where you talk about just I think it was the girl in freckles. She realizes how much time she's spending looking in the mirror and kind of the repercussions of that.
Yeah. Well, because we were talking about image of God stuff too. So it has this reverberation of like, what are we reflecting and where are we giving our energy and time? And God made us to reflect him. And we can either be a reflection. We're made to be like God, to be in a relationship with God. And when you start realizing how much of our focus is inward and not outward and Godward, and how we're actually stealing time from ourselves. That was the thing we're trying to get them is, do you want to steal good time from yourself on this? Or, so trying to reframe. I mean, this is something I'm doing with my daughter. I'm like, hey, get all your responsibilities done now so there's more time for fun. It was kind of that lesson of like, get the homework done so there's more time for figuring out the Rubik's Cube and for playing piano and the fun stuff. So it's actually we're trying to elicit a little bit of self-interest in that one, and that squandering time worrying about things that no one else. And the other one, we didn't want to say it like this, but the lesson we're trying to communicate is nobody else is thinking about you as much as you are, and there's a freedom in that. And once you realize that, it hurts a little bit because I'm like, hey, keep on telling my daughters, I'm like, I know you're worried, but they're all so worried about themselves, they're not even thinking about you. And once they realize that, there's freedom. So the whole point of that was to find a creative way to talk about freedom from the burden of thinking about myself, worrying about myself, when the other image reflection is how we reflect and image God to the world, and that's our role.
Yeah. So good. I hope you and Lindsay keep doing that. I love that you're doing this together because I bet there's amazing conversations that happen just between the two of you on how you're doing as parents. But it really is a helpful resource for parents that are watching. So again, it's called God Made Me in His Image. This is a book that Justin Holcomb and his wife Lindsay have written, a great resource with scripture, just some good fun facts about animals. It's all just encouraging kids in their bodies, but also just understanding that God made them good and to have a purpose to what he created them for. So anyways, love chatting with you, Justin. It was really helpful, insightful. You've done a lot of research and you know a lot about this topic, and I just appreciate you and Lindsay putting it into a book for parents.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time and great questions, and again, honing in on something that most parents either feel insecure about and not sure what to do about, and how to handle it, but also to shine light on it for the goodness of the children God's entrusted to us, that they would feel the reality of being made in God's image and what that actually means for them. So thank you very much.